wife convinced him that it was just the other people that they were hiding in the dungeon. That's all. Hello, welcome to another episode of Myth, Legends, Fairy Tales, and Makeup, the series where I tell you the original stories that led to some very popular films while I do my makeup. If you are new here, welcome! My name is Chantal, but you can call me Chanty, and today I'm going to be telling you the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, which was another inspiration for Jack the Giant Slayer, a film produced in 2013. If you remember from last week, Jack and the Beanstalk is a different story from Jack the Giant Killer, but similar to Jack the Giant Killer, Jack and the Beanstalk has no known original author, but the story has been printed many times over, the first of which was in 1860 by Joseph Jacobs. The version that I will read to you today was written by Iona and Peter Opie in their fairy tale anthology, The Classic Fairytales. I will have the information for this book written in the description down below, along with the links for Bailey Sarian and Robert Welsh, whose Get Ready With Me series inspired me to create this one. There was once an old widow with a son named Jack who she spoiled to a fault. Jack was kind of dumb and useless and spent all of her money on things that they didn't need. Eventually, it got so bad that the woman ended up telling Jack that they had no money left. So Jack convinced his mom to let him sell their cow so that they could have some money until they could figure out what else they could do. His mother reluctantly agreed, and Jack set off the next morning to sell their cow. On his way to the town market, Jack met a butcher who tricked him into selling the cow to him for a hat full of beans. When Jack showed the beans to his mother, she was pissed. She smacked those beans out of Jack's hand and they scattered everywhere. Quite a number fell into the garden, but Jack and his mother were pretty upset, so they went to bed right away, supperless. The next morning, they awoke to find a giant beanstalk in their garden, so tall that you couldn't even see where it ended. Jack was convinced that if he climbed this thing, he would be able to find fortune for his mother. His mother tried to stop him, but Jack was resolved, so he began to climb the beanstalk. When he reached the top, he found himself in a desert land with nothing in sight, so he decided to wander to explore the land. Eventually, he runs into an old woman who asks him where he's from and if he knew who his father was. Jack explained to the woman his story and how he'd come to be in the land and that he'd never known his father, but every time he asked his mother about him, her mother burst into tears and wouldn't answer any of his questions. The woman told Jack that she was a fairy and she would tell him everything about his father and how he could find riches if he did everything that she told him to. Jack was frightened but agreed to the terms. So she told him that his father had been a very rich and kind man that had befriended a giant. The giant had heard of Jack's father and wanted to steal his fortune. So he cozied up to Jack's father, who let him live in their house. And once the giant was trusted enough to know where their treasures were hidden in the house, the giant attacked and stabbed Jack's father. The giant would have killed Jack and his mother, but in a moment of weakness, he said that if Jack's mother swore that she would never tell Jack about what had happened with the giant, that he would allow them to live. Jack's mom agreed and fled with baby Jack in her arms. The fairy then revealed that she had been Jack's father's guardian, and when he had died, she had lost her powers. When Jack had bought the beans from the butcher, her powers had been restored, and she'd magicked the beans to sprout a giant stalk to form a ladder so that Jack could reach her. She told him that the giant lived in the desert land that the beanstalk had led to, and that if Jack avenged his father by punishing the giant, that all the treasures in the giant's home would be his because they had originally belonged to his father. She also told him that if he didn't do exactly what she said, that there would be dire consequences for him and his mother. Jack set off immediately and walked all day and night until he reached the giant's large mansion. He accosted a woman outside of the giant's home and begged her for food and lodgings. The woman turned out to be the giant's wife and told Jack that a terrible giant lived there and would certainly gobble him up if he tried to spend the night. Jack was scared, but convinced the woman to let him spend the night in their oven so that the giant wouldn't find him. When the giant returned home, he said he smelled fresh meat, and his wife convinced him that it was just the other people that they were hiding in the dungeon. That's all. Then she made the giant his dinner, and Jack watched from a crack in the oven as the giant ate and ate and ate. Eventually, when the giant had had its fill, he demanded that his wife bring him his magical hen. When the giant had his hen, Jack realized pretty quickly that this hen would lay a golden egg every time the giant said lay. The giant eventually passed out and Jack snuck out and stole the hen. Jack managed to get the hen down the beanstalk, and his mother and him made a fortune selling the golden eggs. For many months, they continued this way, but eventually Jack craved adventure again. He snuck back up the beanstalk one morning, disguised as a woman wearing a dress, and colored his skin. He was unrecognizable. When he finally made it to the giant's mansion, he had a harder time convincing the wife for lodgings and food. The wife warned Jack, who she thought was a woman, that her husband was terrible and had been even more terrible ever since a boy had snuck in and stolen his prized hen. Jack pressed her and eventually managed to convince the giant's wife to let him stay the night. This time, after eating, Giant demanded that his wife bring him his bags of money, but not before he beat her around and called her some pretty horrible names first. When the giant passed out, Jack stole the bags of money and ran for the beanstalk. When he found his way to the bottom of the beanstalk, he discovered that his cottage was empty. So he asked a neighbor where his mother was. Eventually, he discovered her at a neighboring cottage, for she had fallen very ill in Jack's absence. He found her and, with all the money that he had stolen, brought her back to health. Jack didn't climb the beanstalk for another 3 years. And when he did, once again, he disguised himself so that he was unrecognizable. This time the wife's giant was even harder to convince to let Jack spend the night in their oven, but eventually he convinced her. When the giant returned home, he once again smelt fresh meat, so this time he searched his kitchen in hopes of finding the intruder, but failed to check the oven. After he ate, he demanded his harp, which his wife brought to him. The giant demanded the harp to play, which it did of its own accord. Jack was mesmerized, and as soon as the giant passed out, he snuck out to steal the harp. What Jack didn't know is that the harp was actually a fairy. So when he picked it up, it started screaming and woke up the giant. Luckily for Jack, the giant was drunk, and that made its pursuit very slow and stumbling. Jack managed to get down the beanstalk and be most of the way of chopping it down before the giant even stepped foot on the beanstalk. So when he did, the beanstalk gave under the giant's weight, and the beanstalk and the giant went tumbling to the ground, causing the giant to die upon impact. After this, Jack swore to his mother that he would never venture out again. And he kept this promise, living the rest of his days a tame and happy life. I liked that Jack was given the opportunity not once, but 3 times to kill this giant and avenge his father. He never does this, but instead slowly steals the prized possessions of the giant and eventually kills it by accident. If it had been me, I probably would have slit the giant's throat maybe like the first time I was in its mansion. I mean, you're in a kitchen. There's kitchen knives everywhere. Seize the opportunity, Jack. Definitely the second time at least. When Jack saw the giant like physically and verbally abusing his wife, like Guy's gotta die. I guess the giant was very materialistic, and losing the hen, bags of money, and the harp was like a slow form of punishment. But I still think he deserved greater pain than just losing his toys. I guess that makes me team Jack the Giant Killer, because you know he would have murdered the giant the first time and helped the wife recover. Let me know down below what you think of the story of Jack and the Beanstalk and what you would have done in his situation. Also, if you like this video, if you like my vibe, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Take it easy. I'm just gonna zoom in so you guys can see. Let's get all the way. So you guys can see the Beanstalk eyeliner that I did. Pretty cool, right?